Hey folks, today on Two Kinds of Music, we take a look at 3 albums by Tim Buckley. So Tim Buckley was a fascinating and supremely talented singer-songwriter. He worked in a number of different genres, including folk, pop, kind of avant-garde, free jazz, and funk. He was an unparalleled vocalist, one of the most passionate vocalists that I have ever heard. He had something like a 5-octave range or something. Now, as far as his lyrics go, I often don't get a ton of intellectual stimulation or emotional engagement from his words, but it's from his delivery of those words where I am really engaged. He died way too young. He died in 1975 of an apparent drug overdose, and by all accounts, he was totally broke with nothing but the clothes on his back and a single guitar that he owned. It's one of music's great tragedies, I think. One of those what ifs, what if Syd Barrett, what if Hendrix, what if Mark Boland had lived longer? What would they have done? And I often think of that with Tim Buckley. So my introduction to Tim Buckley's music was actually through 2 covers by This Mortal Coil, the kind of 4 AD supergroup. And that was a Song to the Siren, which was sung by Elizabeth Fraser, and that was on their first album. And then the cover of Morning Glory, which was on their second album, Filigree and Shadow. So the 3 albums we'll take a look at today are Goodbye and Hello, Dream Letter Live in London 1968, and Star Sailor. Okay, so let's start with Goodbye and Hello. Goodbye and Hello was Buckley's second album, and it does appear on the popular 1001 albums you must hear before you die. It was released in 1967 on Elektra. It was produced by Jerry Yester and Jack Holzman, and it features Lee Underwood on guitar, Jerry Yester on various keyboards, Carter C.C. Collins and Dave Guard on hand percussion. Now the album opens up with, I think, 2 of its weaker songs, and probably the 2 weakest songs on the album, and those 2 songs are No Man Can Find the War and Carnival Song. So No Man Can Find the War is pretty typical of your kind of anti-war song from the late 1960s, and Carnival is kind of a waltz with kind of this creepy carnival vibe. I think both of them are just okay. I probably would have put them a little later in the album and opened up with something a little stronger. But starting with track 3, I think the album really cranks up. We have a track called Pleasant Street, which is just a killer psychedelic pop song. We have Hallucinations, and Hallucinations is fantastic. It's easy to imagine this song during the opening credits of a spaghetti western, where our anti-hero is kind of wandering around the wilderness, perhaps being haunted by all of the people he has killed. It's really an intense song, and the spaghetti western genre often does feature these kinds of intense pop songs that are shown during the credits or maybe through some kind of montage. And then we have the track I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain, and this is my second favorite song on the album. And this thing just totally cooks. It's a total kind of freak out jam with some really killer hand percussion. And I believe that Tim's son, Jeff Buckley, also did a cover of this song. And that ends side 1. Side 2 starts with 4 songs with a kind of common theme, kind of a theme of a wandering man searching for meaning. It kind of feels quest-like. There's a little bit of a medieval vibe in these 4 songs. And the first of those is Once I Was. And this album kind of slows down. It's a beautiful ballad that, again, would not feel all out of place on a spaghetti western. It's a real downer of a song, and I really like it. It has some great lyrics. I think maybe some of Buckley's best lyrics. And then we go into Phantasmagoria in 2, another slower ballad. It's very dreamlike, it's very pastoral. It has a really nice lead from Underwood. And I think Underwood is kind of Buckley's secret weapon on a lot of his albums. Underwood played on almost all of Buckley's studio albums, I think on 6 out of his 9 albums, and he was also featured on a number of live albums. And Underwood was just a really interesting guitarist. He always knew the perfect thing to play. He wasn't very flashy, but his licks were just so smooth and a kind of a perfect complement to Buckley's vocals. And what's interesting about Underwood is after he worked with Buckley, he really didn't do much recording. Throughout his life, I think he recorded something like 3 little kind of solo acoustic guitar and piano albums, but he did end up being a music journalist, a writer for kind of a regional publication in Southern California, and then he also went on to work with Rolling Stone. So after Phantasmagoria in 2, we get to the Knight Errant, again that kind of medieval vibe, that kind of questing song. And Knight Errant includes some great harmonium work, and I'm not sure who plays the harmonium. That might be Yester, but it's super minimal and it does have that medieval vibe. And then we get to the title track, Goodbye and Hello. It's very psychedelic. I think this album is kind of that psychedelic pop feel. This has kind of odd and otherworldly imagery, and again, kind of conjuring that kind of fantastical setting. And finally, the album ends with what I think is one of Buckley's best songs, and that is Morning Glory. And Morning Glory was covered by This Mortal Coil. It's one of my favorite songs of all time, and it uses really concrete imagery to paint a very haunting picture. And I just wanted to read a few of the lines here from that song. As I lit my purest candle close to my window, hoping it would catch my eye of any vagabond who passed it by, and I waited in my fleeting house. Just a brilliant, brilliant little folk song here. It has great backing vocals that create an almost religious kind of liturgical vibe. It's angelic. And I used to wonder if this song was about a man encountering Jesus. And I don't think it is, and that's basically because in a live version, Buckley would say that it's about a hobo beating up on a collegian kid. I don't get that at all from the vocals. I don't know if he was, but that's what he says the song is about. And so, yeah, so Goodbye and Hello is a really good introduction to Buckley. It's not my favorite Buckley album, but I do really like it. I like him more as he progressed. Okay, so next up is a live album, and that is Dream Letter, live in London, 1968. So again, that was recorded in 1968, recorded at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in October of 1968. It's a 2-hour concert featuring most of the best of his songs up to that point. So I think on his kind of first 3 albums, this is kind of like a best of performance. I think one of the reasons why it sounds so good, especially for a live recording in 1968, is this scaled back band. So he didn't have enough money to tour with a full band. He didn't have a full drummer. He didn't have a drummer at all in this performance, not even hand percussion. And he often worked with 1 or 2 percussionists. And so I think with the scaled back nature of the band, not having to mic on drums, because sometimes in those early recordings, those early live recordings, a live drummer could kind of blow out some of the mics. It was harder to get a good mix for a live recording then. But he didn't have a drummer at all. And so he had a guitarist, again, Lee Underwood. He had David Friedman on vibraphone, and then Danny Thompson from Pentangle on the bass. And the inclusion of the vibraphone and the kind of scaled back version of this band would kind of point in that direction that he would take on some subsequent albums, where he would kind of move into a more kind of free jazz, kind of an avant-garde jazz vibe. And the band just sounds amazing on this recording, especially the pairing of the vibraphone with Lee Underwood's guitar is really cool. And I think Buckley plays 12-string guitar on this performance, and it's really good. And one of the things that, if you haven't heard this album yet and you check it out, one of the things you'll notice is, like, you know, a lot of times great vocalists are only good in the studio with studio trickery. But that wasn't the case for Tim Buckley. His voice was just as good in the studio as it was live. I would say maybe probably even better live, just because there's just more passion. And man, his voice just sounds incredible on this performance, and every performer shines on here. he has a lot of control over his vocals. He has this great range, and he very kind of deftly switches between this kind of nice angelic sound into these kind of grunts and groans and weird noises. Man, the command he has over his voice was like nothing I've really ever heard before. So some standout tracks on Dream Letter Live are Buzz and Fly. Again, one of my favorite Buckley tunes. It's just a total laid-back groove. I love it so much. He does a great performance of Morning Glory. Dolphins, a Fred Neil cover. The Earth is Broken, live from Room 109, and a track called Once I Was. But the whole concert is great, and I do highly recommend Dream Letter Live in London, 1968. Okay, the final album for this first episode is Star Sailor, released in 1970 on Straight Records, and this was actually produced by Buckley. And with this album, man, wow, Star Sailor. Star Sailor is one of the most challenging albums I've ever heard. It's definitely a love it or hate it album, but you can't forget it once you have heard it. Here, Buckley moves, with his last album, Lorca, he started kind of moving into this jazz territory with kind of an avant-garde, almost free jazz style. And here he fully embraces those styles. And he really does produce one of the most challenging and divisive albums that I have ever heard. So I look at Lorca, the album before it, as kind of his In a Silent Way. And In a Silent Way, Miles Davis would kind of introduce his new direction in sound, and then he would follow up In a Silent Way with Bitches Brew. And I look at those two albums, Lorca and Star Sailor, kind of as Tim Buckley's In a Silent Way and Bitches Brew. I think those comparisons are apt. And I actually think about Buckley in terms of Miles Davis and also Bob Dylan quite often. And sometimes I wonder why Buckley didn't get the kind of fan recognition. He didn't get the popularity that I think he deserves. And I think that has to do with something like Davis and Dylan, is that Buckley changed modes quite frequently. However, Miles Davis changed music and changed his music, 4 or 5 times throughout his career. Dylan changed his sound quite often. He still does in his long career, but both Davis and Dylan had long careers. You were looking at maybe 50 or 60 years. They changed a handful of times. Tim Buckley, on the other hand, his career was only 9 years. That's 9 years he was recording, and he changed genres 3 very, very different times, going from kind of pop, folk, psychedelic into avant-garde, and then he would end his career with 3 kind of sex-fused funk albums that would even make somebody like Prince blush. So yeah, he never, his fans never knew what was coming. Every time you bought a Tim Buckley album when they were new, for those few people who did, they had no idea what kind of music they were going to get. So Star Sailor was kind of a career-ending album. It really tanked at the charts, and I don't think he knew how to follow that up. It probably kind of depressed him a little bit. He was already, heavily a drug user. And so he just kind of went off another deep end and did some funk albums after Star Sailor. And he never really kind of recovered what little momentum he had or might have had. But Star Sailor is one of the most unique, it's one of the boldest artistic statements I think ever recorded, and I think it is a masterpiece, although it's not one that I often feel like listening to. I need to be in a very, very specific mood to really enjoy Star Sailor. So some real standout tracks on Star Sailor. We have, of course, Song to the Siren, famously performed on the last episode of The Monkees. And that version that he performed on The Monkees is quite different than the version on the album. But that version from The Monkees is on a best of collection. And I actually prefer the version that he performed on The Monkees. It's a little prettier. But it's probably his most famous song, again covered by This Mortal Coil and also John Frusciante, among others. And it's probably as close to pop as Star Sailor gets. The songs on Star Sailor are very complexly composed and arranged with lots of weird sounds, and Tim Buckley is really pushing his vocals into new kind of sonic territory, doing lots of weird grunts and groans and just scaling the octaves that his voice can reach, going up and down in pitch. Really, really wild vocal performances. And also, once again, on Star Sailor, he is joined by Lee Underwood. And Lee Underwood is fantastic on this album. Lee Underwood shines on all of Buckley's albums, but he especially shines here because he's able to give Buckley's weird vocal experimentation some kind of grounding. And on this album, we also have some horns by Bunk and Buzz Gardner, and they play flute, sax, trumpet, and flugelhorn. So really, really cool compositions here and arrangements. I love the instrumentation on Star Sailor. Another standout track is Monterey, and this is an absolute jam with Lee Underwood doing this incredible riff. It really kind of rocks in this weird kind of avant-garde way. It's a real standout drum part also from Maury Baker, and it reminds me of a drum part that John DeJohnette might have played with Miles Davis. It's really busy and really groovy. It's chaotic, the drumming, but it never loses the groove. And the drumming pairing with Underwood's guitar really does add this important kind of groundwork, this foundation that Buckley can build upon with his vocals. And then we have a track called Jungle Fire. And Jungle Fire is my favorite track on the record. I like Song to the Siren, but I prefer the version that he did on the Monkees more than the version on this album. So on this album, Jungle Fire is my favorite track. And it's really another standout Underwood track. Underwood's playing with Buckley is some of my favorite guitar playing. And it's so tasteful and restrained. And restrained is not a word that Buckley knows when it comes to his vocals. So he really needed to pair himself with somebody who could complement his vocal style. And I think they really do that. And they're really able to lock in, especially with the drumming and the horns. It's just fantastic. Jungle Fire is amazing. It has a really nice groove and it just kind of cooks. And then we have the weirdest song on the album, and that is Star Sailor. My wife hates dissonant music. It really kind of triggers her anxiety. And she hates like a lot of that kind of avant-garde jazz and stuff and free jazz. But I was listening to Star Sailor the other week, and she came home right in the middle of this track Star Sailor, and we both looked at each other and just started cracking up. And she's like, "What the hell are you listening to?" Because this track is something like 17 different vocal loops just of Buckley's vocals, all kind of pitched and harmonized and doing these weird things. And it really does kind of remind me of what these sirens might have actually sounded like if they were real, singing these haunting melodies. It's a really weird song. And yeah, if you crank it up, I'll tell you what, it's a real party ender. If you're having a party and you need people to go home, throw on the title track to Star Sailor. And I guarantee you, everybody who leaves, the only people who will be left at that party will be people that you want to hang out with. So of course, over the years, after Star Sailor was released, it started to become reevaluated. It kind of became a cult classic. And now people kind of herald it as one of the great kind of albums from its time. And yeah, it's really challenging and it's interesting. And I do need to be in a specific mood to listen to it. But when I am in that kind of mood, it really is the only album that kind of scratches that particular itch. I guess maybe something by like Frank Zappa might. But yeah, Star Sailor, really interesting album. So if you've never listened to Tim Buckley, maybe you're one of those people who really only knows Jeff Buckley. And Jeff Buckley is kind of infinitely more popular than his dad was. And I find that a little odd. I think Jeff Buckley put out one album, and I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's great. I don't think Jeff really ever reached the kind of artistic level, the kind of level of artistic statement that Tim Buckley reached a couple of times during his very short career. They both had very short careers. Of course, Jeff died very young as well. But if you only listen to Jeff Buckley and you've never checked out Tim Buckley, I do highly recommend him. And I do recommend starting with the live album that I mentioned, and that was Dream Letter Live from London. And you can actually find that album in this little box set, and this box set is really cool. It has 3 different live concerts, and I think live is where Tim Buckley really did kind of excel, because it gave him this kind of freedom of expression, and he could kind of go off of the vibe of the band in a live setting. And so if you are curious, I do highly recommend Dream Letter. It's my personal favorite Tim Buckley album, and I think it's fantastic. All 3 of these live albums, we have Dream Letter, Live at the Troubadour, and also Honeyman. Honeyman is also fantastic. All 3 of those are streaming, at least on Apple Music. I'm sure they're probably on Spotify as well. So luckily these days, a lot of Tim Buckley's music is pretty easy to find, even on CD. That's how I do most of my music listening. So I have all of these on CD. For quite a while, I think his songs were his albums were kind of out of print and maybe a little harder to find. But now we have access to so much music that they are easier to find. And I do recommend you checking him out, especially if you've only ever listened to Jeff Buckley. You will hear some similarities, but there are also a lot of more differences than similarities. So, all right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at these 3 albums by Tim Buckley. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.